Good day, sir. We are the Group 3 reporters, the gay, lesbian, queer, and pop culture.
What is gay or homosexuality? Homosexuality is a sexual interest in attraction to members of one's own sex. The term gay is frequently used as a synonym for homosexual. Female homosexuality is often referred to as lesbianism. At different times and different cultures, homosexual behavior has been variously approved of, tolerated, punished, and banned. Homosexuality was not uncommon in ancient Greece and Rome, and the relationship between adult and adolescent males, in particular, have become a chief focus of Western Catholicism in recent years. Judeo-Christian as well as Muslim cultures have generally preserved homosexual behavior shameful. Selected theories of homosexuality. Psychologists in 19th and 20th centuries, most of whom classified homosexuality as a form of mental illness, developed a variety of theories on its origin. The 19th century psychologist Richard von Krafft-Ebing, whose Psychopathia Sexualis 1886 included masturbation, sadomasochism, and lust murder. In its list of sexual prevention, saw it as originating in heredity. His contemporary Sigmund Freud characterized it as a result of conflicts of psychosexual development, including identification with a parent of the opposite sex. There are four issues about homosexuality. First is gay rights prior to the 20th century. What is gay rights prior to the 20th century? It is a religious admonition against sexual relation between same-sex individuals. Long stigmatized such behavior, but most legal codes in Europe were silent on the subject of homosexuality. The judicial system of many predominantly system of many Muslim countries invoke Islamic law in a wide range of contexts, and many sexual or quasi-sexual acts, including same-sex intimacy, were criminalized in those countries with severe penalties, including execution. Third, it is gay political victories. What is gay political victories? The gay political victories is increased visibility and activism of LGBT individuals in the 1970s helped the movement make progress on multiple fronts. In 1977, for instance, the New York Supreme Court ruled that transgender woman Renee Richards could play at the United States Open tennis tournament as a woman. Additionally, several openly LGBT individuals secured public office positions. Kathy Kusachenko won a seat to the Ann Arbor, Michigan City Council in 1974, becoming the first American to elected to the office. And the last is gay marriage legalized. Massachusetts was the first state to legalize gay marriage, and the first legal same-sex marriage was performed on May 17, 2004, a day when 77 other couples across the state also tied the knot. Edith Windsor and Thea Spire wed in Ontario, Canada in 2007. The state of New York recognized the residents' marriage, but the federal government did not. When Spire died in 2009, she left her state to a Windsor since the couple's marriage was not federally recognized. Windsor didn't qualify for tax exemption as a surviving spouse. Windsor sued the government in late 2010 in United States. Windsor months later, U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder announced that the Barack Obama administration would no longer defend DOMA. And the contemporary issues of gay or homosexuality is as mentioned above, different societies respond differently to homosexual. In most of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, both the subject and the behavior are considered taboo, with some slight exemption made in urban areas. In Western countries, attitudes were somewhat more liberal, although the topic of homosexuality was little discussed in the public forum during the early part of the 20th century. It became a political issue in many Western countries, and during the 20th century, this was particularly true in the United States, where the gay rights movement is often seen as a late offshoot of various civil rights movements of 1960s.
Lesbian. What is lesbian? Lesbian is a homosexual woman. The word lesbian is also used for women in relation to their sexual identity or sexual behavior, regardless of sexual orientation, or as an adjective to characterize or associate nouns with female homosexuality or same-sex attraction. The history of lesbian. The concept of lesbian to differentiate women with a shared sexual orientation in 20th century. Throughout the history, women have not had the same freedom or independence as men to pursue homosexual relationship, but neither have they met the same punishment as homosexual men in some societies. Instead, lesbian relationships have often been regarded as harmless, unless a participant attempts to access privilege traditionally enjoyed by men. As a result was documented to give an accurate description of how female homosexual was expressed. In early sexologists in 19th century began to categorize and describe homosexual behavior. By lacking of knowledge about homosexuality or women's sexuality, lesbian as a woman of who did not adhere to female gender roles. They classified them as mental ill, which has been revised since late 20th century in global scientific community. While the research of Lisa Diamond identifies sexual desire as a core component of defining lesbian, some women who engage in same-sex sexual activity may reject not only identifying as lesbian but as bisexual as well. In other women, self-identification as lesbian may not align with their sexual orientation or sexual behavior. Sexual identity is not necessary to the same as one's sexual orientation or sexual behavior due to various reasons such as fear or identifying their sexual orientation in homophobic setting. And health issues of lesbian and women who have sex in women. No important health issue of lesbian and women who have sex with women. The sexually transmitted infection to depression and get theft of taking charge of your health. All women face certain health risks. However, sexual majority women, such as those who identify as lesbian or bisexual, as well as women who have sex with women, have some specific health concern. Although your individual are shaped by many factors behind your sexual orientation and practice, including family history and age, it's important to understand common health issues for sexual majority women and steps you can take to stay healthy. Safeguard your mental health. Sexual majority women are at high risk of depression and anxiety. Contributing factors including social discrimination, rejection by loved ones, abuse, and violence. The problem might be more severe for sexual majority women who are not out to others and those who lack social support.
Queer. So, what is queer? Queer is an umbrella term for people who are not heterosexual or not cisgender, originally meaning strange or peculiar. Queer came to be used pejoratively against those with same-sex desires or relationships in the late 19th century. Queer carried particular currency in scandal from the lingo of newspaper exposes and gossip columns to private epistolary speculation. Many lesbians, gay men, and those who would increasingly claim the category transgender who had felt the sting of the queer insult were quite surprised then to encounter the term's re-emergence in the 1990s, spurred both by a political formation of militant and creative LGBT activists and by a new cadre of academic scholars. Queer indicates a range of practices and identities that strayed from the ideals of heterosexual family, be they held by so-called straight or gay people, or that stood outside a particular modern understanding of sexuality as constitutive of the self rather than as a set of situated practices. But I emphasize the word variably because queer activism and queer theory have never been one thing, while the reclamation of the word was offered in large part as an alternative to an increasingly mainstream lesbian and gay culture and movement. Activists and scholars continued to debate its use. What are the issues of queer before? On June 12, 2016, the popular gay dance club Pulse in Orlando was the site of a mass shooting by one assailant, with at least 49 dead and another 50 injured. This hate crime is being called the worst mass shooting in U.S. history. The immediate hearing response from the mayors, police, and FBI authorities, local and national politicians, and the President of the United States, who reached out to express outrage and concern, demonstrates the innermost shift toward acceptance and public support for the LGBT community. A big part of our mission and relationships Australia in SW is to support the LGBTIQ community, as well as their partners, families, and friends affected by the issues they may face. This community comprises of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or intersex people, with 11 Australians out of 100 identifying themselves belonging to the LGBTIQ community. For LGBTIQ people, especially those who are still working through their identity, can experience a whirlwind of different emotions and thoughts as they try to get to grips with their feelings, from trying to cope with their own emotions LGBTIQ people can often find themselves contending with the reactions and opinions of families and friends, not to mention issues in the workplace and society at large. Such issues can take from the form of bullying, discrimination, a feeling of isolation, fear of reaction, or the pressure that materializes when coming out. Relationship and family issues can often arise in the LGBTIQ community, and Relationships Australian NSW is here to help people them through. Mental health. LGBTIQ people are at much greater risk of becoming depressed or feeling anxious compared with heterosexual people. Additionally, drug abuse, self-harm, and thoughts of suicide can affect LGBTIQ people. Homosexual and bisexual people are up to 3 times more likely to become depressed than heterosexuals and twice as likely to fall victims to anxiety. Bullying and discrimination. Bullying is a big part for LGBTIQ people. Approximately 6 in 10 have suffered from verbal taunts and abuse, with 2 in 10 admitting to being physically assaulted. Discrimination in the workplace still affects LGBTIQ people, despite this having been made completely illegal across Australia in 2013. Indeed, 1 in 10 LGBTIQ employees actually quit their jobs after they were made to feel unwelcome, and half of this demographic try to keep their sexual orientation a secret in the workplace through fear of discrimination. How issues were solved? Schools should be safe places for everyone. But in the Philippines, students who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender or LGBT so often find that their schooling experience is marred by bullying, discrimination, lack of access to LGBT-related information, and in some cases, physical or sexual assault. These abuses can cause deep and lasting harm and curtail students' right to education protected under Philippine and international law. In recent years, lawmakers and school administrators in the Philippines have recognized that bullying of LGBT youth is a serious problem and designed interventions to address it. In 2012, the Department of Education, or DepEd, which oversees primary and secondary schools, enacted a child protection policy designed to address bullying and discrimination in schools, including on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. The following year, Congress passed the Anti-Bullying Law of 2013 with implementing rules and regulations that enumerate sexual orientation and gender identity as prohibited grounds for bullying and harassment. The adoption of these policies send a strong signal that bullying and discrimination are unacceptable and should not be tolerated in education institutions. But these policies, while strong on paper, have not been inadequate in force. In the absence of effective information and monitoring, many LGBT youth continue to experience bullying and harassment in school. The adverse treatment by experience from peers and teachers is compounded by discriminatory policies and stigmatize and disadvantage LGBT students and by the lack of information and resources about LGBT issues available in schools. This report is based on the interviews and group discussion conducted in the cities on the major Philippine island of Luzon and the Visayas with 76 secondary schools students or recent graduates who did not identify as LGBT or questioning, and 46 parents, teachers, counselor, administrators, service providers, and experts on education. It examines three broad areas in which LGBT encounter student problem bullying and harassment, discrimination on the basis of on sexual orientation and gender identity, and a lack of information and resources, and recommends steps that lawmakers, DepEd, and school administrators should take to uphold LGBT students' right to a safe and affirming educational environment. The incidents described in this report illustrate the vital information of expanding and enforcing protections for LGBT youth in schools, despite prohibition on bullying. For example, students across the Philippines describe patterns of bullying and mistreatment that went unchecked by school staff. Carlos M., a 19-year-old gay student from Olongapo City, say, "When I was in high school, they'd push me, punch me. When I get out of school, they'd follow me and push me, stall me, gay, faggot, things like that." While verbal bullying appeared to be the most prevalent problem that LGBT students faced, physical bullying and sexualized harassment were also worryingly common, and while students were most often the culprits, teachers ignored or participated in bullying as well. Contemporary issue of queer. Although a time of great advancement in civil rights, gender and sexual minorities must face growing older in an ageist society on top of having lived through decades of anti-LGBT discrimination and oppression. These lifelong experiences have negatively impacted their well-being and have created unique issues and challenges for them to overcome. In the face of challenges, many older LGBT adults have built resilience and have developed strong support networks, according to Hash and Rogers 2013. This symposium will critically examine contemporary issues facing LGBT elders. Paper presenters will cover issues from unique interdisciplinary perspective, providing backgrounds, defining concepts, and summarizing current research, best practices, trends, and future direction related to the issues for this population. The first paper in this symposium by Hash and Monkowski will examine the unique challenges faced by LGBT caregivers, such as their interactions with formal and informal support persons and policies that have traditionally not supported same-sex relationships and sexual and gender minority identities. The second paper by Butler will explore the experiences of LGBT older adults living in rural regions of the United States, including their challenges with accessing health care and social services and how providers can support and affirm this population. The third and final paper by Hellman will presented the diversity of sexuality and sexual health among older LGBT adults, discuss health disparities and risk factors for this population, and offer recommendation for both public policy and care providers.
Pop culture. So what is a pop culture? So pop culture is generally recognized by members of a society as a set of practices, beliefs, and objects that are dominant or prevalent in a society at a given point in time. Popular culture also encompasses the activities and feelings produced as a result of interactions with these dominant objects. So the founder of a pop culture is the Western world's first the pop culture superstar was probably William Shakespeare. His theater plays are timeless classics, but they wrote them for a mass audience, thus fulfilling pop culture's requirements of art that is meant to be enjoyed by the masses. Pop culture in the 1920s. The 1920s introduced pop culture into the American lifestyle. Pop culture during the 1920s introduced society to things such as the flapper, automobile, jazz, music, movies, and nightclubs. It was the end of World War I, and people in the 20s reflected a new era of prosperity and freedom. Pop culture in the 1940s. The 1940s saw its rise in music and sports. However, society suffered through the Great Depression. Although fashion had settled down and people were going to the theaters less due to financial problems, music was still very popular and uplifted people's spirits. Pop culture in the 1960s. In the 1960s, in the pop culture was sex, love, and rock and roll was the way of life during the 1960s. People used pop culture as a sense of escape from government atrocities, protest, war, and violence. Bands and musicians such as the Rolling Stones, the Supremes, the Beach Boys, and Elvis Presley gained major popularity. Cinema in the 1960s reflected the decade of fun, fashion, and rock and roll, and social changes. Pop culture in the 1980s. The Cold War ended and the Berlin Wall fell. The 1980s saw an upheaval in comedy movies. Bright-colored accessories like sunglasses, bangles, and hoop earrings were a necessity. The 1980s produced some of our most iconic films to date, from E.T. to Goonies to Freddy Krueger. There was something for every group. So the pop culture today. So the pop culture today has evolved tremendously throughout the decades. Fashion is whatever we want it to be. Technology has created a society obsessed with social media. We now have reality television, YouTube, celebrities, music, videos, not to forget everything is touchscreen. So impact of pop culture in our society. With the advent of social media, it has become easier to disseminate culture across the globe, transforming the world into one global society. This has also seen the penetration of pop culture into various aspects of society. To understand the impact of pop culture, we first need to understand what pop culture is. The simplest definition of pop culture is modern popular culture or modern popular culture transmitted via the mass media and aimed particularly at younger people. It has been noted across various surveys conducted that the youth is small influence and is the biggest consumer of pop culture.
How has pop culture changed over time? Obvious examples that change society significantly enough to alter the course of history are radio, television motion, pictures, amplified music, computers, and the internet. Technology recently erected another significant milepost in the pop culture timeline, the development of tech based social networking. What is the problem with pop culture? While pop culture may seem harmless, it exposes people of all ages to sex, drugs, and violence. Children and teenagers all over the world are watching shows or listening to different types of music that reflect improper behavior. How does pop culture influence youth? Pop culture plays an important role in influencing the way teenagers dress, think, conduct themselves, and so on. From popular music genres to the films they watch or the celebrities they idolize, all have a marked effect on their confidence and self esteem.